On July 16, 1790, President George Washington signed into law the Residence Act, which granted him the power to select a new permanent site for the United States Capitol on the east bank of the Potomac River between Maryland and Virginia. It was the demographic center of the country at the time. The founding fathers of the nation wanted to create a federal district which no state would have control over it, and where Congress would be responsible for its own safety and security. The Continental Congress was previously located in the Pennsylvania State House, now known as Independence Hall in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which was easily accessible at the time from the north and the south. The federal government was in the Metropolitan Financial Center of New York City at the time the bill was enacted into law. In 1789, Senator Pierce Butler of South Carolina presented a residence bill in establishing a temporary and permanent seat of government of the United States, but he left the location blank. The capital had moved 8 times between 1783 and 1787. Congress had directed Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton to deliver a report on the new nation's public finances and propose a way of paying the debt to establish a solid footing for American credit. Hamilton's report proposed for the federal government to assume all states' debt, use federal tariffs, and excise taxes to pay the debt gradually. There was opposition in the southern states that had already paid most of their wartime debts. They had little interest in paying debts other states had failed to pay off, and thought other states should do the same. The House was deadlocked on the question of federal assumption of the debts of the states. The U.S. government first found itself in debt in 1790, following the Revolutionary War. Since then, the debt has been fueled over the centuries by more war and by the economic recession. After the Revolutionary War, the massive debt the country collected was a major economic problem. Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of Treasury, presented a plan called the Bank Bill that he believed would help relieve the wartime debt. This bill repeatedly received heavy opposition from Congress, especially from the Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson and Virginia Representative James Madison. However, after Jefferson and Madison had taken into consideration what the South could gain by siding with Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton proposed the Funding Act of 1790. His immediate objectives were to establish credit at home and abroad and strengthen the national government at the expense of the states. He outlined his program in 4 notable reports to Congress. The 3 decided to privately discuss a compromise between both parties. On June 20, 1790, when Congress was temporarily meeting in New York City, Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson hosted a dinner in his residence in New York City. This meeting was a pivotal turning point in what is known as the Compromise of 1790. In attendance was Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton and Representative from Virginia James Madison. Jefferson had asked that both men have an honest and open mind to what was to be discussed. At that time, Jefferson and Hamilton disagreed with each other and were not close, because Thomas Jefferson was convinced that Hamilton was a corrupt, self-interested monarchist. Hamilton was a Federalist who wanted the federal government to hold the bulk of political and economic power. He recommended that the federal government assume the state's Revolutionary War debts. He believed it was necessary to establish the United States credit and to promote investment. Madison and Jefferson were Republicans that wanted the power to remain within the states. Hamilton agreed that the capital be moved south. The southern states wanted the capital near them. In order for this to happen, they had to take a higher share of national debt. Since they were good at paying off their debt, they agreed to this decision. On July 9, 1790, the House of Representatives passed the Residence Act with a vote of 31 to 29 to relocate the permanent seat of the capital to a federal district, not a state. The capital would be in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for 10 years until the new capital was built in Maryland. Philadelphians lobbied hard for the capital to stay in Pennsylvania, and even offered President Washington an elaborate mansion as an incentive to stay. After the construction of the Capitol building was completed on May 15, 1800, Congress started to move to the new federal district. On June 11, 1800, the new capital was named as the City of Washington, in honor of the first President George Washington, who died in 1799. The district was named Columbia. At the time, Columbia was a very famous patriotic and poetic reference to America. Now, the capital was located in Washington, D.C. President Adams moved into the new presidential mansion in November 1800, which is now called the White House. Congress convened on November 17, 1800, for the first time in the new U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. Debates like this in history have led to compromises to important events and moments. It's important to know the short-term and long-term impacts and consequences of different exchanges in history.